Ahead of Ukraine's presidential administration is urging citizens not to ignore air raid alerts declared in several regions in the capital, Kyiv. The air raid, which sounded for a few hours today, comes as the Ukrainian Air Force hinted of a potential missile threat. The development comes after the United States temporarily shut down its embassy in Kyiv. The embassy said in a statement it indicated the closure comes after receiving specific information of a potential significant air attack. The embassy also recommended U.S. citizens be ready to shelter in the event of an air alert, excuse me, whenever it is announced.
Так клас. Можна і з тієї сторони дороги все познімати.
Well, other foreign embassies were also alerted by the air alerts in Ukraine. One of them, Spain, however, reopened after temporary closure earlier in the day. A statement from the embassy reads, the embassy has reopened after the temporary evacuation. The consular section continues to carry out its functions on a limited basis in Warsaw. Now, much earlier, Spain did shut down its embassy over a possible major airstrike in Kyiv, urging residents in the country to take extreme security measures and comply with all recommendations from local authorities. In the same vein, European countries like Italy and Greece also announced their embassies are closed for the day. U.S. President Joe Biden has agreed to provide Kyiv with anti-personnel landmines. The move comes after a recent U.S. decision to give Ukraine a broader license to use American missiles. In this case, U.S.-made long-range weapons. It's not yet clear if Russia will be the mastermind of the potential airstrike in Kyiv that was planned for today. But Moscow has repeatedly warned of appropriate and tangible response if U.S. missiles are used in its territory. Well, yesterday, the Kremlin said Ukraine fired U.S.-supplied long-range missiles into Bryansk. Russian President Vladimir Putin has since approved changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine, which now states that an attack from a non-nuclear state, if backed by a nuclear power, will be treated as a joint assault on Russia. And as for President Volodymyr Zelensky, he fears his country will lose the war if the United States decides to cut its military aid to Ukraine. Speaking in a televised interview, President Zelensky said, "We will stay, we will fight, we will have our production, but it's not enough to prevail, and I think it's not enough to survive." He calls for unity in Ukraine as it's the most difficult period of the war. He views, however, very dangerous losing unity in Europe. And what is most important, he says, is unity between Ukraine and the United States. To the Kremlin, which says the option of freezing the Ukraine conflict does not suit Russia, although it restates that President Vladimir Putin is open to negotiations. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov declined to comment on the decision by the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv to close today and issue a warning about a potential significant air attack, referring to the question of defense ministry. It comes as U.S. President Joe Biden approved provision of anti-personnel landmines to Ukraine. According to a U.S. official, it's a step that could help slow Russian advances in its east, especially when used along with other munitions from the United States. The U.S. expects Ukraine to use the mines in its own territory, though it has committed not to use them in areas populated with its own civilians. Let's bring in the VOA's Anna Chernikova. Anna, great to see you. Let's begin with that. The U.S. permission to use personnel landmines. What does that mean, and how will this work against Russia?
Good evening. Well, first of all, this is another shift of U.S. policy towards Ukrainian use of the weapons and shells and missiles supplied by the allies, by the EU itself. And well, it's again, it's a strengthening of the Ukrainian position on the battlefield for Ukrainian, especially for the Ukrainian personnel on the ground at the front line. This definitely will help to slow down Russian movement towards and Russian advance in certain areas, especially in the areas where amount of Russian personnel is much bigger and much higher than Ukrainian, and this is basically in the directions like Pokrovsk, in the directions in the Donetsk region. Mainly, this is the main issue for Ukraine, that the number of personnel is much higher. So definitely, the use of these landmines will help and will give Ukraine this very precious time to prepare the defense lines, to basically prepare personnel on the ground better for the defense better, because when Russian forces move fast forward, it's difficult to do. So this definitely should be a strengthening of the Ukrainian position on the front line.
So, Anna, this could only work, if there is a definitive front line in this war. Is there one? Because there is a danger to having those landmines present. There is a danger it poses to the Ukrainian army, to civilians, people who have nothing to do with this war. So is there a definitive front line in this war, an area where the Russian forces do not cross over, where, is identified as this area is where the war is going on in Ukraine?
Well, as far as what was basically went public, and what was announced, that these landmines will be only used in the areas where battles are ongoing, and where and particularly where the on-land movement of Russian personnel is ongoing. So it should not affect civilians. Of course, if we imagine that the area where the landmines are used, the area is liberated by the Ukrainian forces and is back under Ukrainian control, for instance, and people are returning there, it of course can cause certain danger. But we are talking now mainly about the areas where Russian forces, first of all, use their own landmines. So it's anyway a very dangerous area where civilians would not be allowed to move freely. And secondly, which is also very important, these areas are areas where people basically do not have where to come back, because everything is just it's just vanished, it's just destroyed. And even if we imagine that these territories are liberated, it's really it will take quite a long time that for locals to come back, because it's just nothing there, and the cities and villages should be just rebuilt from scratch. So we're talking about very much about the front line, about the battlefield. And Ukraine is already but the most mined state in the world at this point, and it's just about it's just a question about if Ukrainian forces will have similar capacities in terms of landmines against the personnel of the opposing army as Russian army has.
So Ukraine launched its first use, but this is according to the Russian government, launched its first use of the long-range missiles, the Atacama missiles from the United States yesterday, according to Russian authorities. That, of course, raised fears, especially in Europe, and then on the Russian side, about the possible use of nuclear weapons. There were pictures, of Russia setting up nuclear shelters in the country, just in case it decides to use those nuclear weapons. We've seen Russia put up this rhetoric before, and Russia's move is very uncertain. But the rest of Europe still jittery about this. Will there be more attacks? Do you see any any movement, I guess, or any indication from the government that there will be more use of long-range missiles against Russia from Ukraine?
Well, first of all, we don't have yet official confirmation from neither Ukraine nor US that ATACMS missiles were used. However, of course, everyone discussed this, and today everyone also discussed that Storm Shadow missiles were also used by Ukraine. And again, we don't have any official confirmation, of course, but what we do see and what we do have confirmation of is that Ukraine is targeting and is hitting military targets on the territory of Russia, which are located around 200-300 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. And according to President Zelensky, during his speech yesterday, as it was 1,000 days since the beginning of Russian full-scale invasion, he made certain remarks, and answering the question from the journalist who asked him about this long-range capacities of Ukraine, President Zelensky said that Ukraine now has more capacities, that Ukraine has not only Ukrainian long-range capacities, which are so the weapons which are produced in Ukraine made, but and also he said that Ukraine will definitely be very active in using these capacities. So we can consider this as a confirmation that Ukraine will continue to hit and attack Russian targets deep into Russian territory, and we might see more such attacks. At least this is what is expected here in Ukraine.
Well, I guess the Ukrainian government trying to not confirm whether or not it's going to use those, or it has used those long-range weapons, just as Russia not confirming or denying the presence of North Korean soldiers in the country fighting alongside its own soldiers. But President Zelensky says he's afraid Ukraine will lose the war if the U.S. cuts military spending to the country. Where's this fear emanating from?
Well, I think that this is just, it was a comment about, it was a fact that he commented on. So if there is no or there is less support from US, Ukraine will not be able to survive this war. And he already said this before. I don't think that we should consider this as something new or some new statement that he did. It was something that he was commenting on, probably on the question about potential decrease of support. But again, what we are hearing from Ukrainian officials and President Zelensky himself, that it looks like that Ukrainian government is trying to start quite close partnership and close work already with the new administration, which is to step in January. And there are a lot of hopes within the Ukrainian government and society as well that it will be certain success and no decrease in support, but maybe even increase of support will happen. So I would not consider this statement as something new or something that we can say that President fearing that something might happen. But of course, there are a lot of talks around the fact that Trump administration might choose a different path or might take different decisions. Again, we don't know, of course, and we don't really hear at this point any official statements from the future U.S. administration that anything like this is planned. So we can only discuss potential, fears that are just coming in and out. But at this point, President Zelensky was just basically making comment on a potential situation, which, of course, as we all understand, Ukraine will not be able to survive without support from the U.S.
What about the potential Russian strikes on foreign embassies in Ukraine? The U.S. and Spain had to shut operations today, even though Spain reopened a few hours ago. What kind of intelligence are they receiving regarding this?
So basically what happened is that in the morning, U.S. Embassy announced that they will not be open today and that they encourage everyone to be very careful with any air raid alarm happening, and that they asked their personnel not to come to the embassy today, so they are closed, as you correctly said. And according to that statement, there is intelligence about possible attack. Massive attack in the on Kyiv particularly, and in Ukraine, across Ukraine, that Russia potentially preparing a massive missile attack. So this is like a cautious, I guess, actions that were done. But at this point, Ukrainian officials also said that Ukrainians should be very careful, that Ukrainian intelligence sees that there are a lot of two jets which Russia uses for missile attacks are concentrated around the border with Ukraine, and there are signs that they are getting ready and getting loaded to basically attack and to basically be used for shelling. Also, there is a confirmation of at least 6 vessels, 6 boats, the warships which are in the Black Sea, which are the carriers of the Caliber missiles, and 6 of such ships could potentially fire at least 23 Caliber missiles. So there is like kind of Russia demonstrates that either it's trying to scare or create additional tension inside of Ukraine, or it actually really preparing for a massive attack. Anyway, everyone of course are taking this seriously, and if it will be information about this big amount of jets actually taking off and getting to the shelling positions, hitting positions, well, at this point everyone will know that they better go to the shelter and not ignore the air raid alarm. And of course everyone is looking closely to what the U.S. embassy is doing, and also some other embassies in Kyiv. We don't know if the threat is for embassies particularly, but what was announced by the Ukrainian government that the whole territory of Ukraine is under danger, as basically as always, but this time it's additional, let's say, component that U.S. embassy even was closed, that people should be very careful. So we will see. Everyone is ready to go to the shelter when it is needed.
We do hope you stay safe, Anna. You're very important to us and to your family as well. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Well, staying in Ukraine, the U.S. Department of Defense deputy says Russia's nuclear doctrines are not surprising and that they're part of the same irresponsible rhetoric Russia has engaged in for the past 2 years. Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh said on Tuesday there are currently no indications Russia intends to deploy nuclear weapons in Ukraine, and no changes to the U.S. nuclear posture are deemed necessary at this time.
We aren't surprised by Russia's update to its nuclear doctrine. It's something that they've been signaling that they intend to update over the last several weeks. It's the same irresponsible rhetoric that we've seen before and that we've seen, frankly, for the past 2 years. So it's something that we're going to continue to monitor, but we don't have any indications that Russia is preparing to use a nuclear weapon within Ukraine, and we don't see any we don't see any changes that need to be made to our own nuclear posture as well. Russia chose to escalate this war by introducing DPRK forces into the battlefield and into the fight. And so what we are doing is, as we have been from the very beginning, is ensuring that Ukraine has what it needs. So you're going to see us continue to support Ukraine with different presidential drawdown packages that are going to support its short-term and long-term needs.
Also on Tuesday, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said he would not be deterred from supporting Ukraine by irresponsible Russian rhetoric after the Russian president lowered the threshold for a nuclear strike. President Putin's new nuclear doctrine lowers the threshold under which Russia might use atomic weapons to include responding to attacks that threaten its territorial integrity.
There's irresponsible rhetoric coming from Russia, and that is not going to deter our support for Ukraine. We're now on day 1,000 of that conflict. That's 1,000 days of Russian aggression, 1,000 days of sacrifice in Ukraine. We have stood with Ukraine from the start, and I've been doubling down in my clear message that we need to ensure that Ukraine has what is needed for as long as is needed to win this war against Putin. As a statement of intent, I'm pleased to say that we have agreed that all future Brazilian sovereign bonds will be listed on the London Stock Exchange, showing once again the gravitational pull of the City of London. I met with President Xi. This was the first leader-level meeting between the United Kingdom and China for 6 years. We had frank, constructive and pragmatic discussions. As G20 economies and permanent members of the Security Council, and at a time of huge volatility, I think we both recognized the importance of engagement. I was clear that we will always act in our national interest and that we have a shared responsibility to work together on challenges like climate change and delivering growth. So we agreed to a new dialogue on those issues. Of course, there will continue to be areas where we don't agree, including their support for Russia's war and on Hong Kong. But here too, we need to engage. The lesson of history is that the more we're able to deal with problems, the world is safer when leaders talk.
Well, hearing from the new G20 President Cyril Ramaphosa, who's calling for stakeholders to be reasonable and level-headed over U.S. authorization of longer-range strikes by Ukraine and Russia's response by updating its nuclear doctrine. He was speaking at a briefing at the close of the G20 summit in Rio.
The issue of utilization of nuclear, it's something that must be seen as calamitous for all of us in the world, and also the increased threat of utilizing long-range missiles and so forth. So it just means that this conflict is escalating to a very dangerous level, and it therefore requires cool heads, because we've been calling for the settlement of that conflict through negotiations, and we think negotiation is the only way out to resolve this conflict. And I've said to both presidents, both President Putin and Zelensky, that all conflicts end in either winning, defeat, or negotiation, and we've got to choose the best way out. And I've always said that the best way out is to negotiate. Well, sit around the table and find a solution that will accommodate the interests and the concerns that all parties have. And we as South Africa still hope and wish and want to work for the attainment of peace in that area and also negotiation.